Hello, and thank you for joining us today. We're really delighted to have you with us for this conversation. Whether you are neurodivergent yourself, whether you're working in or managing a team with neurodivergent individuals, or trying to build a more inclusive organisation, I assume that we're all here because we want to be part of teams and organisations where people can do their best work. And today's conversation is all about how employers can get better at building workplaces where people can thrive. So this isn't just about doing the right thing, although it is the right thing to be building more neuro-inclusive workplaces, but it's about understanding also what neurodivergent employees bring to a workplace and making sure that the way that we hire, onboard and support people is set up to bring out the best in everyone. And we're starting to see that reflected in how people search for their next company. Flexa's 2026 Talent Insights report showed that neurodivergent candidates prioritise diversity 46% more than the average, and core hours flexibility 44% more, which is a useful signal for companies thinking about how to start attracting and retaining that talent. So we have got a brilliant panel joining us today from some of the world's most recognisable organisations. And our aim for this session is that it is a really honest, open, practical conversation about what's working, what they've learned, and what organisations can think about starting to do differently. So thank you for joining us and welcome to our panel. I will come round to each of you and ask you who you are, what's your role, and to tell us a little bit about your company. Jemima, shall we start with you?
Lovely. Thanks, Christine. And hi, everyone watching. It's great to be here. So I'm Jem. I'm head of Togetherness and Wellbeing, one of the best industry titles you could ever wish to have. I work for Heineken, which Ollie just called out was probably also a great company to work for. And did everybody ask me when I came to a meeting, are you thirsty? Which I loved. So yeah, Heineken, I'm so proud to work for them. They're like the biggest nation's leading beer and cider company. You might know brands like my Beer Moretti water glass here and Strongbow, Heineken, of course. And what you might not know, is that we also own and support loads of pubs across the UK. So we really do see ourselves at the heart of communities. And that's why my title is Head of Togetherness. Rather than anything else, because I really believe in what they do and what we do here at Heineken.
Amazing, thank you. Miranda.
Hi everyone, I'm Miranda Sims. I am the Senior Wellbeing and Inclusion Lead. I've been in this role for about 4 years with TUI, and I've been at the company for 17 years. TUI is almost known for a well-loved and trusted tour operator, and this year we're kind of transforming really into more of a travel experience. So we've got over 11,000 colleagues, over 300 retail stores, 70 plus aircraft, 6 hotel concepts, and a portfolio spanning beach cruise, city tours, and more. And I guess for us, the whole important thing of our entire travel experience is about being more inclusive and putting our customers at the heart of everything that we do.
Amazing, thank you. And Ollie.
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you for coming to me last. This is the hardest question. Who am I and what do I do? I don't know, no idea. Nice to meet you all. My name's Ollie Bell. I work for Flutter as an Inclusion Wellbeing Manager. So Flutter, for those who don't know, is the parent company of brands in the UK such as Tombola, Sky Bet, Paddy Power, Betfair, PokerStars across the country, across the globe. We've got other brands including Sportsbet and FanDuel, so a real global reach company. So I'm part of the team that I suppose creates environments where people want to be. That's typically how I try and summarize my job to my dad, because it's not a job that he had in his business when he was my age. So yeah, I work to try and create environments where people want to be, where people can do the best work, and thankfully to the title of this workshop, where people can thrive too. So thank you very much for having me.
Amazing, fantastic. So in terms of getting into this in a bit more detail, I wondered if you'd be open to sharing a bit more of a background on your own experience with neurodiversity and why it matters so much to get this right at work when we're looking at supporting neurodivergent employees. Miranda, can I come to you first on that one?
Yeah, sure. I'm having technical issues and I've got a double sound here, sorry, so please forgive me. So for me, Sorry, can you repeat the question? Oh gosh.
Yeah, just your own background of neurodiversity and why you think this conversation matters.
Yeah, perfect. So for me, this is both professional and personal. Throughout my career, I've seen and I've heard firsthand how many neurodivergent individuals are kind of trying to succeed in environments where often weren't designed with different thinking styles in mind, communication, or can you still hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you okay. I'm
God,
sorry if
it's
you're
just on
getting...
screen. With different communication styles in mind, or even sensory needs. So early on in this role in particular, I wanted to kind of better understand that lived experience directly from our colleagues. So I launched a series of neurodiversity podcasts, and that was to speak to colleagues who were either neurodivergent, as well as those colleagues who were caring for neurodivergent children, to really understand how supported or unsupported that they felt within our business. And for me, that was really, truly eye-opening in terms of the inconsistency in support of understanding, psychological safety that people were experiencing. And I almost see that podcast series as the ripple effect behind a lot of progress that TUI has made since then around neuro inclusion, both internally and externally. I think one of the biggest catalysts, I think, for me from there was our neurodiversity employee network group that launched from 3 of the colleagues that I interviewed on the podcast as a result. And that's really kind of shaped and our organisation without having that shared community and that platform of colleagues that are sharing that lived experience to kind of help shape that positive change across our business. And I guess personally, for me, I am neurodivergent myself. I found out later on in life that I had ADHD, and I also have family and my children who are neurodivergent. So seeing what they've gone through personally and how they experience life being neurodivergent really kind of opened my eyes to how different people experiences things differently in the world, and how much energy can go into like masking and adapting whilst trying to fit into systems that don't naturally work for you. Workplaces, schools, pretty much similar. And so that's why it really matters to me, because getting this right in the workplace or at schools isn't for me just about policies or adjustments. It's really about creating environments where people feel understood, supported, and that they're able to bring their true authentic self to the workplace without fear of judgment. So ultimately, when people feel safe to do so, and everyone benefits, that individual, their family, teams, organisations, everybody. So yeah, it's really, really important.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing with us. That's delightful to hear that ripple effect that can come from one action that then, has that amazing ripple. How wonderful. Jem, shall we come to you on that one?
Yeah, I feel like just building off what Miranda said, personally, that masking piece really stands out for me in my personal experience. So yeah, self-diagnosed ADHD. I've got a lovely little daughter who's 6 now, and their parent is clinically diagnosed ADHD. So I definitely, and also my best friend as well. So I definitely had this thing where I love, that way of thinking, that way of interacting, the high energy, some of these kind of things that some ADHD folk are more known for. Obviously, everyone's different. So I definitely gravitate towards this way. But I think when I was a kid, and now I'm sort of, out and proud in the sphere. But when I was a kid, the masking, my Lord, the energy it would take. I remember printing out reams and reams of paper and just, spell checking things and going into my first agency as a comms exec. And my manager just being like, why can't you just get your spelling right? Why can't you get these things on time? And the amount of energy I do and stress the night before and feeling sick on a Sunday because I've been worried about a Monday. And, and then, even when I was a kid, I would do a sport a night and 2 sports on a Wednesday. And somehow my parents and I all thought that was normal, that I was doing 6 sports in a 5-day week. And I realized it's obviously just me masking my energy and my need to move around. You can tell on camera I'm even doing it now. But that idea as a kid, which I will be really aware of now with my child. Sit still, stop fidgeting. And it's like, but I'm not trying to do anything. I'm not trying to be difficult. It's just how my brain and my body is reacting to this situation or this, moment. So I think coming out, in later life in this way is really powerful. I do see so many more of my traits as superpowers, even to the extent that I went to a bar a few years ago in London and I got chitter-chattering to this guy, got all overexcited, all energy, all hyper-focused on what this guy was saying. He was a lighting engineer. I was like, wow, I want to know everything about lighting. And then we stayed in touch, we got his number. And then at the company I was at, Photobox at the time, I was like, let's light up some of our photos. I was doing their brand management at the time. And in classic ADHD fashion, this one conversation, hyper-focus, turned into a 2-year project where I projected the photos that I had in mind on Buckingham Palace for the Queen's Jubilee.
That's amazing.
So yeah, it's a complete superpower, but until you turn it into that lens, it could be, oh, she's distracted, what's she off doing now? So I think it's really important to really own that and be like, there are some brilliances and then some pains to manage along the way.
Glorious. Thank you. And Ollie.
My go, yeah. I've really enjoyed that. Thank you for and Miranda, absolute fair play for getting through with feedback in your headphones as well.
Absolutely.
I felt your pain there. Well done. My background to neuro-inclusivity, neurodiversity, I suppose comes from a place similar to Miranda's, I suppose, really, which is kind of like passively observing and just being curious and trying to learn from others who are around me. And I'm really privileged that I've had roles like these for a while that have given me the opportunity to be curious about people who've walked a different path to what I have and live in a different world to what I have and look at that world through a different lens and really learn about kind of some of the barriers that they might face that I don't. And it's always fascinated me because I think I can see, although I can't feel it, I can see how those barriers could make things like the workplace really challenging for people. I'm also really passionate about trying to change that workplace and make sure that we do remove some of those barriers, or as many as we possibly can. So that's kind of my background with neurodiversity and learning more about individuals' experiences. And it's clearly important. It's clearly an important thing to do, because I think without a neuro-inclusive environment, we've not got an inclusive environment, right? If our aim is to create an environment where everybody feels comfortable, feels valued, feel like they belong, then excluding one person because they're neurodivergent isn't an inclusive environment, right? So of course it's important to make sure that we consider individual needs and differences when aiming for that inclusive environment. And I'm really interested in kind of like, what's the result if we do create that inclusive environment? And Jem's point there around, well, if we do, we're able to really equip these superheroes with their superpowers to be able to project things on the side of Big Ben. Like, what? Why wouldn't we do that stuff? So yeah, I think it's super important, not just for the individual and that they feel safe and they feel comfortable, they feel valued, they feel belong, but the outcome of that is that the business does well as well. That's clearly going to have an output on things like our productivity or on things like however it is that you measure effectiveness within your business. It's clearly going to make a big difference. So yeah, that's kind of my background and why I care and what I observe from the importance of creating your inclusive spaces.
Really helpful. Thank you. So when we're thinking about what are some of the biggest misconceptions that you still hear about neurodiversity, and what would you say is the reality that more people need to understand? Jem, I'll come to you on that one.
I think obviously I'm coming from my own lived experience as well as my title and my role. I think it's the fact that it's seen as maybe, or it's perceived as a deficit sometimes, and that kind of feels really painful as well when that's you. So I think it's kind of reframing what that is, and that comes from education and awareness, right? Because you don't know what you don't know until you know. So not calling anyone out on that, but there is a real need for education and better support and really helping people to lean in. And I think, for me also, it's just, it is just different ways of thinking and processing. So if you think about, to your point, Ollie, actually, when you think about business growth and pioneering and innovation, all these things that are so important in this particular moment that we're living through in the world, and its complexities and needs for organizations to be agile, innovative, that neurodivergence can really bring a different lens to a group or team conversation. So what you're trying to do is surely harness that and take the barriers away. So again, like that idea that somehow reasonable adjustments, a special treatment doesn't fit very well, doesn't feel good. And also, this is not true. What you're trying to do is take away a barrier to allow, to Miranda and Ollie's point, everyone to be in the room and the best ideas to flourish.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Ollie, do you want to say something you want to add there about misconceptions?
Yeah, absolutely. I think misconceptions are often, well, they're one of the barriers, aren't they? Like we've mentioned a few times in this conversation that the barriers to people's ability to be able to be their true self in the workplace is multifaceted, and one of them is driven by misunderstanding and misconceptions. And I don't always think they're intentional. I think people's misunderstandings and misconceptions come from them walking through the world the way that they have and seeing the world the way that they've been told to look at the world. So going back to the deficit model that Jem mentioned there, that was an idea of how we described neurodiversity or disabilities in the past, was kind of like, and by the way, I'm not a medical professional, so caveat, but we diagnosed people off kind of deficits and said what people weren't so great at. So that's where those misconceptions came from. But I also think kind of language adds to that barrier too. And the language is evolving and continues to evolve really quickly in this space. And I think though that sometimes getting language incorrect and not with intention, I think is really important to highlight. People make mistakes and say the wrong things. And I've done it loads and continue to do it. And I learn by putting my foot in it and saying the wrong thing and then correcting it, owning it first of all and saying, I'm really sorry, I genuinely didn't mean to do that. But learning from it thereafter is really, really important in this space. And language for me, for disabilities, for neurodivergence, is really interesting because it kind of, the bit I always remember, the bit around, one of the examples of which I've been told off for saying the wrong thing, was around using terms like autistic people over somebody with autism, and like how that is a big difference for some people sometimes. I have learned that you've got to be led by people's preferences. Don't get me wrong, like it's really important not to sort of criticize somebody who prefers to self-identify in a particular way. That would be a bit strange. So I think, but the difference between describing somebody as a person with autism over an autistic person can be really, really important, because for some people, they find their autism central to their identity, and to try and say that it's separate to who they are and how they behave and how they feel is it kind of, and also to sort of put it in a different category to the point where we go, you have autism right now, but you might not forever, is also massively incorrect. So I think language is really, really interesting. And I often face or speak with people who are terrified about entering this space in fear of getting it wrong, because we do see examples of people who've used language incorrectly and been heavily criticized or cancelled as a result of it. And I don't think it's productive to do that when people's intentions are genuinely to be able to try and create spaces where people feel uncomfortable, that occasionally get it wrong. One of the misconceptions that I see around this, which creates the barriers, I think is related to language. I think that answers your question. I can't remember what it was, sorry.
It does. Miranda, is there anything you'd want to add on misconceptions there?
I think you made a really good point around the language piece as well, though, because the whole thought of being cancelled, it builds into the whole point of why people are scared to have conversations and to say things, because their fear of getting it wrong, right? So it is really important that we do allow those safe spaces for people to learn. But in terms of the misconceptions, for me, one that I tend to hear quite a bit, I think, is around people thinking that neurodiversity looks the same for everyone, or that you could somehow spot someone who is neurodivergent based on experiences that they've had with other people. When the reality is that neurodivergence is incredibly diverse, and it could never be the same. So you can have two people living with autism who are very different, who experience completely different strengths, challenges, communication styles, and support needs. And so it's really important that we're remembering that our brains are it's different in the same way that we all have a different fingerprint. Nobody is ever going to be the same, and we should be treating everybody as individuals, whether you're neurodivergent or not. And to the point around language, yeah, I might be happy to be called somebody with autism, but then someone else might prefer to be called autistic. So you do these treat people as individuals and have those conversations, and just be carefully curious in how you're having those conversations and exploring what works for those individuals.
I love that as a principle, careful curiosity. Yeah. Thank you. That's really helpful. So we've touched a little bit on kind of support and adjustments and some of those misconceptions. Miranda, if I can stay with you, I wonder if we can think a bit about some of the examples about the strengths and perspectives that neurodivergent employees bring to a workplace, and how organisations can start to create environments where we can be projecting photos on the side of Buckingham Palace.
I love that. Yeah, obviously they can bring some really powerful strengths, without a doubt, from creative problem solving, innovation, that deep focus. If I think about myself, like I have ADHD, combined ADHD, and I can easily get distracted, but then I can really hyper focus and I can be spending hours to get something done for a deadline that's due tomorrow. So there are so many different strengths that we should really be embracing and thinking about, as opposed to always thinking about the deficit, like Jem mentioned earlier. There are individuals that are great at spotting inefficiencies, and so we should really be using those colleagues to help us spot things, opportunities that we might have otherwise missed. So, there's some really great strengths there. And I think to those strengths, it's really important that in order for the colleagues to be able to shine, we create that environment where it allows them to shine. So for me, I think there's a few things that we need to think about as organisations to be able to support that. I think clarity is probably one of those things, around making sure that, we're setting the right expectations and priorities, and that communication is really clear and not ambiguous for individuals. Flexibility is also really key, I think, in terms of recognizing that people may want to work differently, but they'll still achieve the same outcomes. And I guess one of the biggest things for me is that psychological safety, right? Again, ensuring that that environment is one where people can truly feel like they're able to be open and honest about how they work, and that we can support them in doing that. And I think if I think about misconceptions in the workplace, people often think that they're reasonable adjustments, it's expensive, or there's not many people that need it. But actually, a lot of what you can do to help support people with neurodivergence will help everybody, and it'll be a lot more inclusive by just asking these questions, making simple little changes. Conversation for me is key, and not putting everybody into one bracket.
Yeah, super helpful. Thank you. Ollie, is there anything you'd like to add on that one?
Maybe just a little bit, and just to reinforce Miranda's point really there around kind of not treating everybody with the same bracket or the same umbrella, or putting everybody under the same sort of label and going, we will treat that group of people like this, because that's just not gonna work. So when it comes to kind of thinking of how we can utilize people's strengths, certainly creating spaces where we can find out what those strengths are is really, really important. And again, sorry, I'm just repeating what Miranda said. It's psychological safety again, isn't it? People aren't going to show us their strengths if they don't feel comfortable and safe to do it, without the fear of being judged or the fear of being criticized. So we need to remove all of that fear, so that person's got a space to be able to go, hey, look, this is my strength of being able to do that. So, and when we do that, we see amazing things happen. I always think, so my brother's dyslexic and he's a tree surgeon, and he's able to look at a tree and dissect it in his brain so that the limbs of the tree fall from the sky to the floor without hitting anything. And I'm like, how do you do that without, you see engineers who scribble things on paper and are able to sort of draw. My father-in-law's dyslexic, and again, he's able to construct furniture in his head and then map it out, and without any sort of I need the IKEA rulebook to be able to put that stuff together. Do it. So, and that's because they're in these environments where they feel safe and they feel comfortable and they're able to really shine. So I suppose our jobs as employers is to try and create those workplaces.
Absolutely. Jem, is there anything you want to add on that one?
Yeah, to build off what Ollie just said about workplace, building and fostering that inclusive sphere, and also Miranda, you were talking about the reasonable adjustments and how open they are, how easy they are. And so I was thinking we did some work with our task force Enable, who are brilliant, by the way, and so organised and focused and always delivering. And the one thing they did last year is actually they created a guide to inclusive events and meetings, and we really pushed that through the organisation. And one of the aspects of that was sensory toys, but also or productivity tools, as we call them, but also the quiet areas. And at first you think, oh, a quiet area for neurodivergent folk, but actually what happened when we did our big annual meeting was that actually the presenters went in that room just to have that kind of quiet moment before you go out and bare your soul for your presentation. And people just wanted some time out from the social intensity of what is a full day being face to face these days. So like you say, I think it's kind of the idea of moving friction for all is the way to go. And even with our meetings, we always send agendas. We always try and build a reflection time. Being off camera sometimes is just I feel that my energy of, I'm quite a smiler. So my energy is smiling all day. If I feel off camera for half an hour, it really gets me at my energy to just recalibrate and to take a breath, And so these pieces benefit, ND folk, but also if you're a carer, having an agenda where you're prepared the night before, maybe something's, you've got an appointment in the background, or being a parent, a working parent, and these things benefit everyone. So I really like what you said, Miranda, that's the kind of the goal. And again, it reinforces that non-idea of special treatment. No, we don't need special treatment. It's about benefiting all and business and people.
Yeah, absolutely. That inclusion by design, I think, is such a different way of reframing it, isn't it? Yeah.
And it's so easy to do, isn't it? But I think the thing with inclusion by design is you have to think of it at the beginning.
Yes.
Which sounds so obvious, but it's so hard to do, especially the pace of business, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so, we just moved offices, actually, gorgeous offices up in Edinburgh and in London. We're very fortunate. But yeah, Enable came in and they consulted, on that whole design process. So we have lovely quiet spaces. We have a well-being room. We have all these, low sensory areas. So we have all this built in. But if it wasn't for them and it wasn't, for that sort of collaboration at the beginning, it would be quite hard to retrofit that. So I think it's really starting to put that in the organisation's mind across every touch point to do digital accessibility or physical spaces across the whole spectrum.
Yeah, amazing. That's brilliant hearing what that looks like at Heineken.
You're very much invited to come.
We would love
have a drink at our bar.
Miranda, it'd be really interesting to hear a little bit of what that looks like at TUI in terms of creating those environments where, what that looks like in practice.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we've done so many different initiatives and programs that have rolled out. We've kind of taken a bit of a practical, multi-layered approach rather than kind of relying on a single program or initiative. And I think a lot of what we do and what we talk about has stemmed from our community of our our neurodiversity employee network group, and just tapping into that lived experience. For us, that is so important for us to kind of get right. So we, like Jem, we have wellbeing room as well, although currently in our current office and head office is not as used as much in the way in which it sounds like it is in your office, Jem. But we have things like our neurodiversity power hours that we've offered, which for us, power hour is an hour of learning, which is virtual. It's sometimes live, other times it's recorded. We've had over 800 attendees that have watched that specifically on neurodiversity. Alongside that, we've trained over 600 line managers specifically on how to support our neurodivergent team members, not just in theory, but practically as well. And then we've had over 3,000 of our colleagues attend our neuro-inclusive approach to travel. So a big shout out to Perfectly Autistic, who supported on delivering for both of those sessions, which is brilliant. And then some other things as well. I mean, there's loads. I could be here all day. Like, I really have to shout out to the network group, because they've really supported that, and the leads from our network group. But other things, like in our mentoring program, we have the theme of neurodiversity now. So you can select a mentor who is neurodivergent. And these small things make big impact as well. So we share interview questions if we're made aware that colleagues are neurodiverse. And to be fair, we do that to all colleagues, 50% of the questions anyway, but specifically if someone's neurodiverse and they tell us that they want additional reasonable adjustments in the interview process, we will support that. And then one of the things that I feel like I really have to shout out about is our neurodiversity guide. Now, calling it a guide for me just doesn't do it justice, honestly. So it was co-created by neurodivergent colleagues, and it's had over 300 colleagues actively accessing it. But when I tell you, it's honestly the most practical one-stop resource for whether you are neurodivergent and you're trying to embrace your own strengths, or you're supporting a colleague, or you're leading a team. And it's packed full of like practical strategies with real tools that are developed by neurodivergent colleagues, with straightforward advice that you can kind of use immediately. There's all things in there from managing like sensory overwhelm, supporting conversations, finding your community, whether that's internally or externally, to creating, again, that psychological safety. There's like real clear guidance in there. And honestly, it's for someone who's neurodivergent, when you click on it, it's clean, it's easy to access, it's easy to navigate through, and there's so many different things in there. And for me, it's the simple things like that that really make a difference to individuals who are neurodivergent, but also to colleagues to be able to help support and understand them a little bit more, and also our leaders, because it's really important that they're able to be able to support and understand and know where to point in the right direction. But I could go on for days, because as I say, there are so many little things that people don't realise that make a big impact.
Amazing. Gosh, that is a fantastic range. One of the favourite bits of my job is getting to hear from lots of different companies the impact that network groups can make. And I think it is so incredibly inspiring to hear the impact of those across those different ways. Amazing. Ollie, tell us about Tombola.
Yeah. Which bit? I'll tell you. Right, okay.
What are some of the practical ways that
Okay.
like in terms of
Practical ways? I mean, all of the above. Again, I know I'm just repeating myself here, but and I think the reason why I want to say all of the above is because there's no one size fits all. Like, it's really important that to the points that we mentioned there, we listen and we hear the experiences that people like those members in our network groups are going through, and we try and make adjustments, and we integrate new practices, and we produce new guides, and we put people on training, we do all that sort of stuff, and we do it consistently, and we don't just do it on Neurodiversity Awareness Week, for example. Like, don't get me wrong, awareness events are really important at starting a conversation and building a platform to launch from, but you need to continue to beat the drum and offer new initiatives and new solutions as you progress. But there is a question in the chat, which I do want to speak to a little bit, because this is, I believe, from somebody who's no resource, who's brand new to this, who's no budget. And I think it's really important that we obviously come from organizations that do have budget to spend on people like us for a start, whereas there might be other businesses that don't. And simple stuff that can make a big difference, I think, is by just having the conversation in the first place and actively starting to talk more about neuro-inclusivity, about mental health, about menopause, about any of the stigmatized topics that we've found in society across generations and cultures and our culture in the past. And one way of which you could do that is by just copy and pasting the link to this and putting it in your Teams group and going, just being on this webinar was really cool for anybody who's interested. And I guarantee there'll be somebody somewhere who sees that and needs to see that, because when they see that, they'll go, oh, this person cares about this particular topic. I feel more safe, feel more comfortable to be able to come forward and say, this is who I am, this is how my brain works, this is how my body works, and I feel a little bit more comfortable to be a little bit more open about myself. So I've personally seen the impact that sharing lived experience sensitively and carefully, and making sure that we protect people when we do that, the power that that can have at making sure that others feel like they're not alone and they're not strange and they're not different, and that they've got an ally, they've got somebody who they can come and speak to about this sort of stuff. I think that doesn't take a huge budget. I think that's probably all do within the workplace.
I think, Ollie, to build off your point and to answer, is it Christine T, I'm going to call you, in the chat, like one thing that we did, to your point there, was Enable set up, a guy called Jack set up safe spaces. So Jack is neurodivergent himself. He works in commerce at Heineken. And yeah, he sort of said, right, I'm going to set up these kind of quarterly check-ins for ND folk. It's just people to come in and say, oh, I'm going through this and I'm feeling this way about it, or I'm newly diagnosed. I don't really know what to do with this, or, even to talk about reasonable adjustments, because how do you know what you need when you're finding this all out? Like it's not like someone's handing you a book going, here you go, this is what, so it really is I think it's a discovery journey. And it can be really hard, like to your point, Ollie, like to have the answers, and people are asking you things, you're like, I don't even know. I'm just, making sense of this as I go. So I think that Safe Spaces, which is just a community Teams chat internally, we send an email out saying, if this applies to you, please come along and we'll share. And it's not, in this case, for folk who aren't fitting that brief. And yeah, it's just nice to have that space to talk honestly and try and figure it out. I hope that helps, Christine.
I think that's super helpful. I think the idea of starting somewhere, like not every organisation can do everything immediately, and very often there is no budget. But that it doesn't mean that nothing can be done. Some small steps can make a really big impact. Picking up a bit on what you said, Jem, there are on that kind of reasonable adjustments. We know that they are a legal right, but lots of employees don't necessarily request them because they don't, it can come with a stigma, or they may not want to be going down that route. I wondered if you could share any experience from your organisations around how you help normalise that process, so that some of those adjustments can be embedded, whether that's within a formal process or without. Where has that worked well?
I think also it's back to that point that I just raised. It's kind of helping people who are in that group know where to go, the signposting, what's available, and to know they can reach out. And then equally over here, you've got your managers, helping them feel confident, comfortable, reassured by having, clarity around what's on offer at the organisation and where to help that colleague. I think that's really the beginning of that whole process. So for us at the moment, we're actually Julie, who might be on this call listening, heads up our policy team, and she with Enable are looking to review our neurodiversity policy. And when we talked about this, like what's driving that, it really is to help managers have a lot more clarity, to really spell it out and to help people feel supported and signposted. We also included all this in our wellbeing booklet, really for the first time. So when you think about wellbeing and what people are going through, or what maybe their children and families are going through, what support does Heineken offer you through our many services and resources? So that's now the wellbeing booklet. So really starting to integrate this in to, again, make it not different, to make it normalized and to make the conversation open, I think goes a long way to sort of, culture change, which is what it is, isn't it? Culture change and understanding. I was doing a talk at our industry grocery, D&I Live, it's called, big event back in October on neurodiversity. And I was amazed to see that, I think it was in the S&P 500, only 1% other leaders are actively out with neurodiversity. So it's really hard, isn't it? You know, you see more job ads going up, like you say, to be more inclusive, but you see less leaders role modeling that. And even I was reading a research piece that the team sent me before this called brightmine.com 2025 report. And it said that there's a gap between intent and reality. So 69% of organisations in the UK actively encourage these conversations about adjustments and pieces with managers, but only 25% are then following through in some kind of practical way. So there's a bit like you saying, Ollie, it's not for lack of wanting or being inclusive, but there's something not sticking in the way that we're then translating into felt experience and action for those colleagues that need it most.
And that's very well put, and it reflects a comment that someone has just put in the chat here saying, I've been in environments that say they're being inclusive, but it can be quite performative, rather than that true psychological safety, or they might have initiatives that sit on top of a culture, but that culture simultaneously values overworking and maxing output that can, you know, be damaging for everyone, and particularly someone from a neurodiverse background. So the question there is, how do you make sure the entire workforce is on board with the empathy and kindness required to make a workplace truly inclusive? That is, I
saw a comment in the chat from a lady called Beth T, and she was saying about the managers being, you know, necessary to be upskilled. And really, in a way, it should be kind of compulsory for all managers to know this and to have those skills. But also, I do think it comes back to role modeling, because to your point, it's you have to see it and you have to understand that that's okay to then want to follow that. So I think that's really key to lifting the lid and making it part of the culture.
I would really agree with that. Sorry, it's one thing that we definitely try to encourage quite a lot in our organisation is our leaders leading with that vulnerability and role modelling and sharing openness, because when our leaders are talking about their differences and being transparent about what support they need themselves, then it normalises those conversations, and then others don't feel that fear around asking for it themselves. It kind of removes some of that stigma as well that's kind of been ingrained for years, and it makes it part of normal working life, right? So for us, we also try to build in that flexibility into everyday ways of working. And to Gemma's earlier point, so that reasonable adjustments aren't seen as something that's special and an add-on. So thinking about things in terms of the way that you're working around how you run those meetings on team calls, and, you know, speaking about all the different elements that not just suit people who are neurodivergent, but absolutely everyone, to try to be a bit more inclusive, how you're sharing information, and just thinking about different working styles. So it's definitely a work in progress. And I think having the line manager sessions is really important, because these are people that are leading our people, and they need to be comfortable and confident to be able to have those conversations. And it's not about them being experts per se, but it's about them being confident to be able to have that conversation and to be able to ask, what can I do to support you? How can I help? And, you know, just being a bit more flexible.
That's really helpful. Ollie, is there anything that you'd want to add from a Tombola perspective around the support that's in place for line managers?
So we support our line managers, and I suppose more specifically like our hiring managers, because I think when it comes to inclusive environments, we want to make our recruitment process inclusive, because that's the start, that's the entry into the business, right? Like from picking up their job spec, from the job advert, through to contacting the hiring manager, through to contacting the talent acquisition partner and saying, I'm interested, can I apply, to apply into going through the interview process, yada, yada, yada. Everybody knows the process, sorry. But the point being, it's really important that we coach and we support our hiring managers during that journey to, first of all, let them know that reasonable adjustments are okay. Like, I think sometimes there's misconceptions around how we need a diagnosis for somebody to request reasonable adjustments, which isn't true. Like, we don't need to have proof that somebody is neurodivergent or disabled in order to provide a reasonable adjustment. And then supporting managers on what those adjustments might look like. Like, typically speaking, we might to Miranda's point earlier, give people interview questions ahead of the interview. It might be that they want to be interviewed in a different format or a different way, yada, yada. I mean, the ChatGPT, what examples there might be when it comes to what sort of reasonable adjustments we might offer in that process. But I think it's, to answer your question around what do we do to support managers, it's got to be a kind of coaching kind of opportunity to educate people at the point where they're at, which doesn't quite make sense. So what I mean by that is people are at different learning journeys on this stage. Okay, we've got like some people who are massively against all of this stuff and they just want kind of robots to turn up and do the job and do the job well. Whereas we've got kind of other people who are, I really, really understand it and I really get it, and I just need help as to how I do create inclusive environments. And I suppose this point kind of feeds into the question in the chat, which is how do you make sure the entire workforce is on board with empathy and kindness required to make a truly inclusive workspace? Now, I don't know about the entire workforce, but ways of which we can get people to be on board, and by that I kind of think of buy-in. How do we get people to buy in that this is an important thing to do? I think there are a couple of approaches, and the first is kind of legally, like we should, legally and regulatory, like we have a requirement to do this. And if you don't believe us, we can show you some case law of examples when people haven't done this correctly and the repercussions of that. Morally and ethically, we should care and create environments where people feel like they're supported and they feel like they're able to provide their best at work. And finally, I think there's also, we've touched on it a few times, a kind of a commercial benefit to this too. Like if we have teams and our hiring managers and our managers have created environments where teams feel like they're able to do a better job, I bet they'll do a better job. And I bet there'll be a commercial impact as a result of that. So to try and help nail that down, what does that commercial impact look like? I think sometimes looking at your business strategy and saying, what part of my role ladders up to the overall business strategy? And is my role measured as to whether or not I'm doing my job effectively or not? And then am I able to adjust my working environment so that I am able to do a better job and therefore it ladders up to the wider business strategy and bang, we hit our goals. So that's a couple of ways of which I've personally used when it comes to buy-in, getting people on board, supporting hiring managers, supporting managers in general, to create these environments where people can thrive.
Picking up your point there, is there any advice that you would give to perhaps HR leaders or people leaders who are on the call who are thinking about and trying to build buy-in with leadership for that neurodiversity investment? Is there anything else that you would add, Jem or Miranda, on that for kind of building that internal case that Ollie's touched on there?
Yeah, I think you touched on some really great points, and I think yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yes, sorry. Definitely performance, I think, is key, because when people are supported in a way that suits them, right, then engagement and productivity will improve. But I think also focusing on that talent attraction and retention, because if you're creating those inclusive environments, if you're not creating them inclusive environments, then you risk losing great people, right? And you're limiting who you can attract. I think you shared a stat right at the beginning around what people look for in organizations. So getting that inclusive environment right is key. So adding that to your business case. And then I'd probably say consistency and risk, like making sure, again, you're creating fair, accessible processes that stand up across your organization.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Jem, is there anything you'd add there?
Yeah, actually going just from an inside-out point of view, and by the way, I hope my internet's not too bad because I've got a bit of a lag, but we actually applied this to our commercial real estate, so going out to pubs, and actually we looked at how we could make our pubs even more accessible and welcoming for all disability and neurodiverse folk. And from that, we did things like clear signage, putting the menu up on the website so you can have a read before you go in and feel confident in that process and not overwhelmed. Wayfinding, quiet zones, at certain times of day where you might want to go into the pub and not have too many people around. I mean, this is a few examples of the massive investment we've made here in terms of accessibility. And I think what we saw was actual return on that in terms of commercial return. So we got a customer rating of those customers going in of 4.5 out of 5 improvement around also loyalty. So more customers liked to see these improvements that we made. So we got a wider array of customers in terms of the neurodiverse and disability folk, but also existing customers really liked the way we were being inclusive and wanted to engage more and be more loyal. So I think the opportunity is right there. Whether you look at it from an internal point of view, or that was a sort of slight business case for an external landing on that, but it makes sense. It makes business and people sense. So the question really is, why wouldn't you?
Love that. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm conscious of time. If we can wrap it up, I would love to. We've covered lots and lots of different sort of theory and practical ideas in this session. For people listening in this, what is one thing that people could do differently going back into workplaces next week to try and make workplaces more inclusive for neurodivergent colleagues and team members? What would your advice be on one place to start, one thing to do? Ollie, I'll come to you on that one.
I know this is an odd plug. I'd share this link. Like, it's something that's so simple, and it demonstrates a genuine case of intent. Like, so take the link from this conversation, or even just tell people you came along to this conversation and describe one thing that you learned through a Slack post, through a Teams post, in a team stand-up, whatever it looks like, in order to communicate with your team, just to really start getting the kind of cogs turning, the ball rolling when it comes to demonstrating to groups of people who might not currently feel comfortable to openly disclose who they are and how their brain works. That's a really nice example of reaching out to those groups of people and saying, I care about this topic, and you can kind of come and chat to me about your experiences if you would like.
We love starting those conversations. Glorious. Miranda, what would your takeaway be?
I love that idea, because I think, sometimes people do struggle in terms of where to start, right? I think, there's been so many things shared on here today, but I'd probably say something that's really simple, that not necessarily would just work for a neurodivergent, but just being more inclusive around the whole clarity piece, because I feel like that's one of the biggest barriers for people, that ambiguity. So something as simple as before meetings, emails, just taking a moment to ask if what's expected is clear, when it's needed by, and that the person knows what good looks like. Just removing that ambiguity, making things a little bit easier, reducing some of that anxiety, and that will just help improve that individual's confidence, and just make it easier for people to prioritise and deliver based on what you have. So, conversation of clarity.
Love that. Thank you. And Jem?
Yeah, I think my takeaway from this is that I don't know if anyone on the call has heard this, but you've heard of the emotional labour or minority tax. Have you heard of this? So, it's that idea, isn't it, as a panel, we know that, for those folk in any sort of underrepresented group, the fact that you always are being asked questions, you're trying to explain on behalf of yourself and, whole communities. And obviously for those persons, that can, be quite tiring. It's that kind of idea of tax and labour. So I think, we need to find a way not to rely always on that group to spearhead, and we need to help managers lean in. And I think for me, for managers, what we can do more of is, rather than asking somebody, hey, Jem, what do you need? It's probably like, well, hey, Jem, what's getting in your way? So it doesn't feel like I'm so exposed that I'm not trying to have the answer all the time, but it's, I can talk about what's not working for me in a really honest way. So I think, just to your point, Ollie, that wording and those semantics can really just take that load off people on a day-to-day basis.
What a helpful clarification. That's a lovely idea. Thank you. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Jem and Miranda and Ollie, for your thoughts and your experience. Really appreciate you sharing those with us. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. If you want to find out more about TUI and Heineken and Ollie, you can come to Flexa and have a look at their Flexa profiles. We've got another webinar on a similar topic coming up later in the year, where we're looking at neuro-inclusion in the hiring process in particular. So more discussions on that continuing. Good luck starting those conversations, and we will share the content from today in a blog, so you can come back and review some of these thoughts and ideas and strategies as well. So thank you all very, very much for joining us. Really appreciate you being with us today.